Now let's proceed to the documentation of the understanding of internal control. ISA 315 requires documentation as a means of ensuring that auditors comply with significant requirements of the standards. Or we could say that it is a means of verification if the auditors really understand the internal control of the auditing. All I can say is that we must document every single thing that we do. Documentation is important because maybe in the future you get sued on this audit and you're not going to remember what you did, so it needs to be written down somewhere. And these are the following audit processes that require documentation. First, the discussion among the engagement team and the significant decisions reached. Second, elements of the understanding obtained regarding each aspect of the entity and its environment, each of the internal controls component, sources of the information from which the understanding was obtained, risk assessment procedures performed, and also the identified and assessed risks of material misstatement at the financial statement level and at the assertion level. And lastly, the risks identified and related controls about which the auditor has obtained an understanding. In terms of documenting audit processes, there are 4 different options. First is the internal control narrative. It is a written description of a client's internal control structure. But the problem with the narrative is that no partner wants to read many pages of you describing how the process works. Narrative can be lengthy, difficult to review, time-consuming, and of course, not user-friendly, though they can minimize a potential misunderstanding. Second is the internal control questionnaire. It asks a series of questions about the controls in each audit area as a means of indicating to the auditor aspects of the internal control structure that may be inadequate. It is answerable by yes or no. The problem with the questionnaire is that it assumes the client operates in a particular way. We all know every client is different. Some clients run their accounts payable or their accounts receivable or their inventory processes different. So questionnaire may not fit client's internal control structure adequately, though it is easy to complete. Third is the checklist. It is a list of consideration of procedures that are followed by the auditor. In the case of internal controls, it is a list of controls that should normally be in place. And lastly, the internal control flow chart. It is a symbolic, diagrammatic representation of the client's documents and their sequential flow in the organization. It conveys information visually. It is also a method for condensing an entire business process onto 1 or 2 pages. So the question is, what would be the best type of documentation? The answer is, it depends. We all know every company is different, so auditor must consider nature, size, and complexity of the entity and its internal control, availability of information from the entity, and more. Maybe some company is best documented in narrative or flowchart, or maybe both. Yes, combination of methods is possible. In fact, it's great because we are maximizing the advantages and usage of each. In this slide, we can see the example of the internal control narrative and the internal control questionnaires. You can find it on the book of Dasen et al., The Principles of Auditing. Next is the example of checklist and the internal control flowchart. And that's the end of our presentation. I hope you learned something, and thank you, and may we all live in the kingdom of ends.